In my last video, we took a look at the Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach Ruin Monty Golf locations and recreated everything from both chapters 1 and 3 in Minecraft. Every area from the main golf course up to the catwalks was added in, as well as the AR world, which changes the build completely by adding in plenty of glitching props. So continuing on with this series, it is now time to move on to chapter 4 of Ruin and recreate the bakery and the back hall server rooms all in today's video. These areas are much different than anything we've built so far in this project, so let's take an in-game look at what we need to know before we get started. But first, I'd like to mention that at the exact time of this video releasing, the CuppaTeaExe U2's plush is now available to pre-order. From now and for the next 2 weeks, go on over to u2s.com or click the top link in the video description and you'll be taken to the U2 store page where you can pick up one of these amazing plushies for yourself. Remember, the plushie will only be available for the next 14 days, and once it's gone forever. So be sure to click the link in the video description to buy a plushie for yourself. Thank you U2s for giving me this opportunity and making this possible, but now let's go ahead and continue on with the video. Chapter 4 of Ruin takes place right after leaving the gondola workshop, where the player has to cross through the bakery to reach the beauty salon on the opposite side of the pizzaplex. And from the very beginning of the chapter, the game changes from taking place in large open areas to much smaller and linear hallways that lead to the next locations. But just like everywhere else so far, the bakery is littered with debris and moldy piles of food all over the floor, which leaves only one path open to walk through. Then after leaving through the bakery kitchen, the gameplay once again changes completely as the player is unable to remove the Vanny mask while inside the server rooms and is stuck inside the AR world. But while these rooms are mostly empty, there is a lot of very unique details that don't appear anywhere else, such as a massive statue of Glamrock Freddy that's been destroyed, as well as a larger form of the Mexus entity that watches over the player. Taking a look at the outlines I've made for the build, you can see how it spans across the top of the entire pizzaplex leading towards the west side. So all of these rooms are going to be the last builds on this side of the pizzaplex before we then move on to the remaining few attractions on the other side. Now these three middle sections here are for the server room, and you'll notice that they're not connected to the rest of the build, and that's because it only appears while in AR. Every build I've made so far has a copy of it underneath the main one, and that's because the top build is the normal version of the world and the bottom one is the AR world. Whenever we put the mask on, we get teleported down to the lower version of the build to put us in this glitching world, and then when we take it off we go back to the normal world again. But since we can't take it off in the server rooms, there isn't going to be a build of it in its normal form. But going back to taking a look at the main building of the bakery, I'm going to be splitting this up into smaller parts so that way I don't get confused, since a lot of this build is pretty similar with what's in them. So to start, I'm going to be building this room right here, which serves as a kitchen just behind the main bakery, and then move along across this conveyor belt which leads to the roof of the bakery. From there I'll most likely do the rest of the room surrounding the main build, and then finally we'll do the actual interior of the bakery, so that way we don't get confused with the rest of the build. Though it looks like a mess with all of these different colored blocks, each one of these concretes does represent a different prop that you'll find in Ruin. These blue concrete borders right here, for example, represent the containers that are just right outside the entrance of the bakery. And as I start to fill in the build, you'll notice how some of these blocks do have patterns to them, like this border of brown concrete here that represents a dirt pile just after we fall off the conveyor belt. Now just because I have every different prop marked down with a different color doesn't mean that I immediately know what's going to go where, so this is the reason why I still have Security Breach opened while I'm building. That way I still know what is supposed to go in what place. Then once we finish building the bakery, we're then going to continue on through this hallway here that leads to the three server rooms. Now while these two outside rooms might be pretty empty with what's in them, this middle room right here has a lot of giant outlines that represent all of the props in this room. So for example, you can see this red line here represents the giant show stage that would lead to the atrium, and all of these brown outlines here are for the giant destroyed Glamrock Freddy statue. Now I've built multiple designs of this statue in various shapes and sizes, but this is definitely going to be the most challenging one so far just because of the sheer size of it. And then to finish it off is this small hallway here, which is an exact mirror over the opposite side of the pizzaplex, except this time it's just a continuation from the west side of the server room. From there it's then going to lead to the back side of the beauty salon, which is where we're then going to finish up the build. So let's not waste any more time and get right into working on the build. So now part 1 of the build is now all finished, and I wanted to stop for a brief moment just to go over a few things. There's a few details and designs in this part of the building that's going to be carried over to the rest of the bakery. These blue builds here, for example, are the different ovens that are all over the room, and these are going to be carried over to the bakery in lots of other different shapes and sizes. For example, these are the smaller versions of the ovens that are stacked on top of each other. However, when we move on over to the main room of the bakery, there's going to be designs of this exact same shape that are going to be so big they would take up this entire wall space here. The ovens themselves were probably the most tricky part of the build so far as well, as I wanted to add in a lot of detail. However, the scale I had to work with really limited the amount of stuff I could add into them. This is why you'll see me use things like custom banner patterns on the sides of them, just to add in more detail that a normal block wouldn't be able to add. This is why you'll also see me using custom player heads around the build. That way I can add smaller versions of blocks around the build while also sticking to the scale I have to work with. For the walls, I've once again used the older technique of alternating birch signs and dark oak signs in front of red nether bricks. Now in the past, for all of my other FNAF locations, for this I would have used some map art to have an actual proper checker pattern. However, for the time being, I want to stick to using normal Minecraft blocks, so that way I can add as much detail as I want later on once the main build has all been finished. There's also a small amount of details that come from previous FNAF locations too, like the checker patterns on the floor and the wall. Now for the floor, I once again used a mix of calcite and blocks of coal, so that way we could get the black and white checker pattern, but also using both of these types of blocks has a small amount of texture to it. That way it makes it look like there's some dirt on the floor. Then for the larger dirt piles, I went ahead and used different types of grey colored blocks. That way it makes it look like all of the rubble along the floor. And despite the blocky look to everything, there might be a few extra details that you'll notice I've added in, like the wet floor staff bar here, which is made up of yellow terracotta with a cut sandstone slab on top of it, finished up with a polished black stone button. There's also going to be this broken flashlight charger right here in the corner, which I've once again made by using some custom player heads for the top hat on top of it. Then if we go ahead and move on to the top of the balcony, you'll also notice this setup right here, which is what allows us to connect the wires to go ahead and power the rest of the generators to go on through the bakery. And I've mentioned this on a recent live stream, but something I learned is that we're able to interact with signs. So what I plan on doing in the future once the entire ruin project has been completed is make these fully functional, so that way when we click on the sign, we're then going to be taken to an upscaled version of the wire connection game, so that way we're actually able to power the doors and we're able to have some interactivity in this map. This leads us to the main build of the bakery, which while it's still going to look ruined, there's going to be a big theming contrast, as now instead of the area only being accessible to the staff, this room was a main attraction of the pizzaplex, and so there's going to be a lot more brighter colors to look at. But just like the kitchen, the bakery still has an industrial look to it with the large pipes and conveyors all around it, but the brighter colors instantly stand out to let you know that you're somewhere important. But even when there aren't that many colors to look at, the building still has an exaggerated look to it since it's made to be shown off to the public. So for the rest of the bakery, trash piles aren't just going to be filled with stone or dirt anymore, but now it's going to have some of the pinks and reds of the candy decorations that are made up all around the attraction. However, since this area hasn't been taken care of for a long time, I can't just go back to using bright concrete blocks for everything, so I'm still sticking to using mostly terracotta, which has a much more natural look to it for the environment I'm working in. And while working on some of these details, it can be good not to overthink it and to just start placing down blocks. Some of these surfaces don't always need an extreme amount of detail, because the blocks I'm using already add enough of it that doesn't take away from the look of a build. However, there are other times like the light grey cloths over the bakery that have darker stains on them, and that would cause the build to look dull if they weren't added in properly. So on top of mixing darker grey with the lighter color, I'm also randomly placing down concrete powder to make the stains look more natural and to help blend the colors together better. For the floors, it's going to work a little differently, as most of the trash piles are on the ground level and they're not going to have the same colors that the floor does. So while I'm adding in shades of cyan to the carpets to add in more texture, there's also going to be times where brown and grey blocks will also be added, which might not look nice to look at normally, but remember this entire project is built after an abandoned building. And this is where the build starts to get messy, as now not only is there trash all over the room, but leftover decorations and cleanup supplies also take up the same space, which starts to limit the amount of walkway there is and how much detail I can add in. Now this hasn't been a huge problem for me at all since I outlined everything before I start building, but every area so far has a different way of limiting where the player can or cannot go. Now as we make our way inside the main bakery, I once again need to change my style of building, as now I'm working with very narrow rooms where I can't add as much detail as I could in the more open areas without taking away from other parts of it. Instead of building a massive indoor attraction, this room could be compared to a normal sized kitchen that you might find yourself building in a normal Minecraft house. Decorating the inside of a room has always been something I like doing in Minecraft, and now changing it up by making the place ruined does add a fun twist to it. I'm also now able to start using different types of blocks for the walls and floors, as now detailing is going to be a lot more visible at a smaller smaller scale like this. So while I'm still using concrete powder to add in more texture, I'm now adding in polished diorite, purpur, and some copper blocks, which all have a grid-like pattern to them, which helps show off the original look to the build while still working with a smaller amount of blocks. As always, the blocks I use are going to change depending on the theme of the attraction, but at least getting used to this style of building will be very helpful for later parts of the project. And this is why I still think that building the PizzaPlex in Minecraft is such a perfect way to practice your building skills and to help make your way towards completing big projects like this. Every single room is made up of different colors and builds that are all different enough so that you don't get tired of building the same thing over and over, but to also go out of your comfort zone and start building in ways that you might not have thought of before. With this being my second time building the PizzaPlex, I do have a sense of what I'm doing while I'm building, since I've spent thousands of hours playing and building Security Breach, but this time I now have the experience of everything I've learned since I started building all of these games. You're only going to get better at things the longer you spend on them, and working towards that end goal is always a satisfying process to look at once you've finally completed it. We've now completely finished the bakery part of the build, and I'm really liking the way everything has turned out so far. I've always preferred the PizzaPlex with its bright and flashy colors, and this area still has a lot of it even with all the ruin around. Let's take a quick walk through the in-game path so that way we can better compare this build to what we see in ruin. Now as we do so, you're also going to notice more custom player heads that I've put all around the build, like these traffic cones here and that cardboard box in the corner. There's also a lot more of these cupcakes lying around, and also in this corner here is a prize box which has one of the comic book pages in it. When we make it to the other side of the pathway, we're going to reach these two bathroom entrances where we can go right to go inside the bakery, or we can go left to find the hidden arcade game. And just like in Ruin, if we go inside the bathroom and go behind these stalls, we're going to go through the vent and end up in the room where the Chica's Feeding Frenzy arcade is. And this is still something I'd like to make a working recreation of in Minecraft, and I think it would make another fun addition to the overall project. Now taking a look inside the main bakery, you can see what I was talking about when I said that this room is made up of very narrow walkways, as it can be pretty hard to walk around in since most of these paths are only made up of 1 to 2 blocks. Now at the end here though, there is this large opening that leads to the kitchen. However, for this we're going to need to use the vanity mask to travel through this wall. Now this leads to the main kitchen, where you can see it's normally decorated with some cauldrons for sinks and some furnaces for the ovens. Then on the side wall here, there's this door that leads to a single bathroom where there's a wet floor staff bot sitting in the corner. Then behind these double red doors is the back hallway that leads to the server room. Now these hallways are pretty bland in design, but there are still a few details like this row of sinks and shelves, as well as a single vending machine here. But the main point of this room is really just getting the player to the other side so that way they can reach the server room, which is first of all going to be blocked off by this entrance here. So once again, we're going to need the vanity mask to continue through it, which is then going to teleport us down to the lower build, so that way we can continue on through the map. And as you can see, I've already made a copy of what we've built so far, so let's quickly go ahead and convert this to the AR form. And compared to the other AR builds in the past, this time it wasn't that complicated, as I think the smaller rooms really limited how much weirder details could have been added to these already pretty crowded rooms. Not even the outside of the bakery has any changes made to it, since the mask inhibitor stops us from going to the AR world in this point in the game. But once we do go inside the bakery, that's when more crying obsidian and magenta glass has been placed all around to get the glitching effects that's seen on all of these props. And as you've probably noticed, I've also changed the biome type to a crimson forest, so that way we get these nice atmospheric particle effects. So now we can finally move on to the next bit and build the server rooms, which might not look like there's a lot going on in them, but I really am looking forward to seeing how I build the giant Glamrock Freddy statue. Then once it's all been completely finished, we might as well build the beauty salon hallway to completely finish up with the build. Now I've quickly opened up Security Breach, as there's a few other details that I need to show you before I start building, as if we take a closer look at the floor, you'll notice that it's moving in almost a wave-like motion. Then in this next room, there's a grid-like pattern that covers almost the entirety of the room just before the main platforms. So since these rooms are much bigger than anything we've built so far, I'd like to add as much of this detail as I possibly can to really capture the look of this room. So let's head back over to Minecraft and finish up this build. And now after 15 hours and 36 minutes of building later, everything from chapter 4 of Ruin has now all been completed. And I really underestimated how time consuming these builds would be, as I really thought that this part of the build would be relatively small compared to everything else so far. The larger walls were all filled in with world edit, but all of the smaller details was placed in by hand, as I really wanted to make sure I got the detailing just right. This also carries over to the Glamrock Freddy statue, which for the first time in the series I went into building organic shapes without any sort of testing before I got started, and I think I did a really good job capturing the shapes of all the limbs with all the different angles that they're facing. Speaking of organic builds, in the second server room I also decided to add in the giant Mexus entity that sits in this corner. Now it was pretty difficult to find blocks with the right blues to use for the body, but with the mix of stained glass paints for the electricity effects, I think this build turned out a lot better than I was expecting. Then if we move on through this doorway here, we're going to end up in the AR version of the beauty salon hallway that I also went ahead and added outside the time lapse. Now for the time being it's only going to lead to a blocked off entrance and doorway, however once we move on to the next episode we're then going to be able to access the entirety of the beauty salon. But for now we've once again completed another section of the ruined Pizzaplex, and despite not being that popular of an attraction, these builds in this chapter really grew on me the more I started to realize how much more detail there was all around it. As always, it was a lot of fun to put together, and I really do hope that you enjoyed it as well. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, that is now going to wrap it up for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it and are looking forward to seeing what builds come next in this project. If you are, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications turned on, that way you know the next time I upload and can also help the channel to continue to grow. But with that being said, thank you everyone so much for watching, and I will of course see you in my next video.